The business bubble.
Think we can get started. So, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Bubble. In this episode, we're going to talk about the lean startup methodology. Okay, I'm very excited about this because I think it can be a great blog post, and at the same time, I think it can bring in a lot of value to people who don't know about the lean startup methodology and who are fairly inside the business world. Maybe this can open your eyes to a whole new extent and make you think in very different in a very practical manner as well. I love practicality, by the way. Okay, so what is this lean startup methodology? Well, the lean startup is actually a book written by Eric Ries. Eric Ries is a founder, a tech founder in Silicon Valley. He has helped a bunch of companies and startups. He's an investor, I think, as well, and a consultant. So, I mean, he knows what he's talking about. He basically built his whole company using the principles that are defined in the Lean Startup book. So, it originated with Toyota Motors. So, Toyota back, when the economy was starting to resurge in Japan, they had a very unique and different way of approaching the manufacturing of cars. They did it in very small batches and in very small iterative product releases with validation of what they were doing. So, they were fast at making small components or maybe short runs or sprints. They measured it, they learned if it was okay, and then they continued doing it if it was okay. And if it didn't, then they changed. They did something different. So this is basically where it originated, sort of. But now I want to read you guys the definition that I found in Wikipedia just because it was great. It goes like, the lean startup methodology is for developing businesses and products, which aims to shorten product development cycles and rapidly discover if a proposed business model is viable. This is achieved by adopting a combination of business hypothesis-driven experimentation, iterative product releases, and validated learning. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, it means, the way that I like to see it, is the market is the market is the market. Okay, they get to decide what is valuable and what it is, what it isn't. So basically, if you have something that's valuable, you should measure it against the market. I mean, if you have something that you think is valuable, you should measure it against the market to see if it actually is. See if you're doing something right or not. And the book talks about a build, measure, learn feedback loop. What I like about this is that it treats it sort of like a very process-like recipe or approach. It makes it look like it has a scientific sort of processes and procedures, the scientific method, basically, but for businesses. I like it. I love it. It's like the combination between science and business in this amazing world that I've never seen before. And my best friend, Roy, he recommended it to me. He's a huge geek guy, amazing guy who's going to make rockets and stuff in the future. So he's really into scientific things and business things alike. He knows a lot about both things, and he was fascinated by it. He recommended it to me, and because I don't really read, I kind of listen to the audio version. I recommend that for people who drive a lot or move around a lot and like to listen to podcasts and things. Audiobooks are a great thing to listen to. You learn a lot in the dead time. Okay, so what is this build, measure, learn feedback loop? Okay, let's start with the basics, okay? So the process is basically you build a product or something that resembles your service in a very lean manner, meaning that you don't spend a bunch of money or resources or time in things that are not vital. You want to make the product, the initial product, it's called the MVP, which means minimum viable product, as minimum as you can and as viable as you can, meaning that you want to create something that lets you test your business model or your hypothesis of your business the cheapest way possible, in the cheapest way possible. So meaning you don't have to spend a bunch of money to create maybe a web page that tests if, I don't know, people are willing to buy real estate or whatever. You can just create the page. It's not going to be very fancy, of course. It's not going to have the best design, but it's going to do its job. It's going to let you decide. It's going to let you learn from what your early adopters are going to say. Now we're going to get into early adopters in just a little bit. The second step is to measure the reception and other characteristics of interest that you're trying to measure. So you basically deploy the MVP for early adopters. Early adopters use it. They comment on it. They give you some sort of feedback based on the results from what they do, what they don't do, what they found confusing. And based on that, you can measure different characteristics if it helped or not. If different metrics, basically. You look for metrics that are of your interest to see if it affected it or not. And then the last step is analyze the reports and learn from them. And the idea of this build, measure, learn feedback loop is for you to understand if what you did was okay. If what you did was okay or not. I'm sorry. So basically, you're always going to win in the end because you're going to know what happened. I mean, you're going to know if it was good or if it was bad. And that's a different way of looking at it, right? So it's a more get your hands dirty, start failing, start looking and trying out things to see what things actually click with the client and stick with those. So basically, by doing this build, measure, learn feedback loop, what you're getting is you're learning what is valuable and what is not valuable for the market, what works or what doesn't. And you do this in the most lean way possible, most efficient way possible. Don't waste a bunch of money. Don't waste a bunch of time. Do it this way. I like it that way. Okay, so maybe we're going to go a little bit deeper into each of the following components of the process that I just mentioned. We're going to start with the MVP for the early adopters. Okay, so early adopters are basically a fancy way of calling your initial customers, but they're very important and very special because you target them, and a few of them, by the way. You target a few of them because you believe that they have the characteristics, have the profile of your client that is going to bypass a bunch of different functionalities that your MVP does not have. Now, remember, the MVP is a core product that just has core functionalities. It doesn't have a lot of, nice design, and it's not very friendly for the mainstream client, but it lets you prove your hypothesis or not. It gives you that information. You want to try this out with people that are going to tolerate the lack of design, the lack of colors, the lack of functionalities. You want people that are eager to test this idea that you have, and that'll most likely help you out also in the process. So it's a very small segment of the market maybe that you're trying to get, and basically you got to select those very carefully. And it's usually a few of them because you want to have control over what you give them and what they tell you. You want to be very one-on-one in that sense. But you can have a few of them usually. So those are the early adopters. They are early adopters because they are more willing to adopt the product in an MVP version, and they're willing to give you the feedback. Now, remember, the MVP is very functional, it's practical, and it's very bare bones product. Okay, so that's what's beautiful about it. You don't get to waste a bunch of money. You just try it out with the thing that actually lets you do it, for a small amount of money. So the second step was measure clear points like an experiment. Now, the book talks about different types and strategies to test things here and there. You could honestly use it with A/B testing. They go into this in a little bit in the book. A/B testing is basically when it's a design, it's a marketing design thing. you basically have, let's say, two graphic user interfaces for your product, right? You deploy the A version to a segment of the population. You deploy the B version to a segment to some clients. So the A goes to, some clients, and the B goes to another set of clients, and you measure how was the reception of that new interface. That's basically the raw idea of A/B testing. But what you want to do is to be able to measure specific metrics and that help you learn, for example, customer lifetime value and things that are very important for your business. For example, retention rate, conversion rate, and different rates, basically. So retention rate, by the way, if you don't know, it's the rate at how the customers come back to your product or your service. How often do they do that? And conversion rate usually is done, or how I understand it, is how easily, or basically the metric that lets you see if you can get new customers, new customer acquisition as well. So yep, that's basically it. And then the third process is analyze in order to learn and decide to pivot or to persevere. Now here we're going to talk a little bit about pivoting. Okay, so pivot, the definition of pivot is a change, as I like to call it, in logistics, a change in the macro. So say you have a company that sells shoes, and I'm just making this on the fly. Your hypothesis is that people are willing to buy used shoes. So, maybe I stop using my shoes and I put them on a marketplace and people can look at them. And if they're in, good condition and they look nice and I kind of wash them and stuff, maybe they'll be willing to buy them from me and use them. Maybe they didn't fit or something. That's my idea. I don't know if it's a valuable idea. I don't know if the market's going to like it. So what do? I basically form a hypothesis. I deploy an MVP, which is in this case a web page. That's very easy to do. Just get a freelancing dude or freelancer, or use Hubble to do it. You basically measure what you want to measure, and then you analyze the results. You set the objectives of your experiment, and you analyze the results. Now, the results may tell you, yeah, sure, people like to go into this website and buy stuff. Or maybe the answer is people don't like to be hands-off. Maybe people like to be one-on-one with the person to see if the shoe fits for them. So that's an important piece of information, right? So you analyze the results, and then you realize, okay, should I continue the way that I'm doing things with my webpage, or should I make a change? Should I make it so that we can connect these two people in some sort of way personally, so that the buyer can try the shoes first? So it's like this change in the macro of how you're doing things. It's not a change to change colors or change the text. No. It's a very crucial change. It's pivotal, for the model or the structure of your company, of how you're running it, how it's going to run in the future as well. So those three basic steps are what's needed, or what people tell you in the lean startup methodology is the most important. And basically the whole thing with this is that speed is better than quality. You're always basically going to be better choosing speed, because, as the book basically comments on it, what you're doing is that you're building stuff with short sprints, right? It's called, small batches, they call them there. And with small batches, you basically deploy something super quick for the marketplace. You see how they reacted, and because you produced just one and you didn't produce at scale, then you have the capability of changing your next iteration so that it can be different, and maybe the marketplace will react better to that one, So it's sort of like experimentation with small sprints against the market that tell you if your product is valuable or not. And I love that. It's the perfect combination of science and business at the same time, because you're using a scientific method to analyze and see where your business is going. And at the same time, you are getting your hands dirty. You're that sounds kind of bad, but you're basically putting yourself out there, putting in the work and the hustle against real clients that tell you what they think. And that gives you a lot of information for you to analyze, to decide where do you want to take your business, or if you're doing it right or wrong. So I love that. I really love that. And I highly recommend anybody who is running some sort of startup or trying to figure out if they want to start a company or a startup. I highly recommend for you to read this book. It's an amazing book. I think it's not a classic, obviously, but I think it will become one, honestly, in the future. A lot of people in Silicon Valley have read it, and I 100% recommend it for anybody. Okay, so that's like the basic idea of the lean startup methodology. Of course, there are other topics in the book that I can maybe cover in a later episode. But for now, I just want to leave it here. And I want to talk a little bit more about how Hubble is trying to implement these steps, these processes, this methodology into the business. So Hubble, for those who don't know, is basically a company that helps students perform digital tasks for small to medium-sized businesses that they don't have, all the resources or the knowledge to be able to attain those resources. So what they do is that they post a necessity in the marketplace. The student sees it. He or she applies for it, and if he or she gets the job, then and of course completes it in the time frame, then he or she receives the first of all compensation and the experience. And it's different than most freelancers because our hypothesis, see how I'm connecting things here? Our hypothesis is that we're going to reduce the friction in the whole process as much as possible through the use of Hubble services. So what's a Hubble service? A Hubble service is basically a template that delimits or defines how a service is supposed to be done. So let's say maybe logo design, right? That's for design, industrial design students. So what happens is that a co-creator helps us to design the template, and he or she knows exactly what goes in each of the following spaces. So maybe you definitely need like color palette. Maybe you definitely need the vision or the mission of the company. Maybe you probably need past logos and designs just to get a broad idea of how you want to do them. So, so we create this template, this form for the company or the freelancer that wants the service, so that the freelancer or the company can fill out all of those fields with the information that they have, and they deploy it. And when they deploy it, that template, that service is basically instantiated, and it's now known as a hubby. So a hubby is basically, if you guys know a little bit about object-oriented programming or programming in general, you basically have a class, right? It's basically a template. And when you instantiate it, you have an object. So it's basically the same idea. We have a template. When we fill it out, it becomes a hubby. And the hubby is the thing that goes into the marketplace so that people can look at it and apply for it. Now, the hubby is a very interesting thing because when you complete the hubby, the idea is for the student to be able to know almost all the information that he or she needs for the completion without having to really talk with the person who deployed the hubby. So the idea is a very kind of hands off from both parties as much as possible. Of course, that's not going to be always the case because in a proof of concept, we basically realized that wasn't going to be the reality most of the times, and especially with things that are very subjective like designs, and logo designs and things like that nature. You see, those are things that you have to build, then measure, and then learn from your analysis of the results to see if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Now, what we're doing right now is we're trying to get our first early adopters with real money. We're not talking about proof of concept with Huli because they didn't put in the real money. They just put in, say, the whole structure, the logistic, or the process, right? So we're now trying to really have our first early adopters so that we can test this in a real life scenario situation. Initially, we think that it's not going to be for huge companies or just companies in general because the country right now is going through a financial reform. By the way, it's been going on for like 20 years now, but now, this year, it's going to be finally executed, and basically taxes are going to go all over the place. We have a new tax called Impuesto al Valor Agregado, which basically is going to make the whole chain of production it's going to make the whole chain of production to declare what everybody is spending or gaining with a percentage of the interest. So basically, I can go for it like in a later episode, but it basically means that it's going to be way more formal right now because the idea is for people who are evading the taxes to pay for them or at least declare something, and that so that the government can see who is actually lying or who is actually not lying and paying their taxes, their due diligence taxes. So in that scenario, because we're living through it right now, I think that the best, and we think actually that the best sort of type of early adopter is not a company. It's a freelancer or basically a private person, a person who needs something from somebody else. So person to person. Not really representing a company. However, later on we will, hopefully, try to get those. But right now, that's our early adopting market that we're having in mind. Now, of course, this can always change. By the way, in the book, the early adopters for a case in a company that I don't really remember, but I remember the company was making sort of like energy production things based out of heat. So they basically go into power plants or factories. They get all the heat and they make money. They make energy from that. So their early adopters that they had in mind at first were nuclear power plants or just factories. Different factories. But the thing was that they were wrong because those factories, those power plants, they needed a bunch of rigorous tests and a lot of precaution. So it didn't really work with them. They actually went with some different type of company that I remember right now. But basically my point is that your early adopters are also a hypothesis. So everything is a hypothesis. Everything needs to be tested to see if it actually works or not. So our early adopters, we think, are freelancers right now because of the context that we're living through. So yeah, of course, we're going to try to be very small, very quiet, low profile for now, so that we can perform our build, measure, learn feedback loop and many of those feedback loops so that we can understand exactly what the market is willing to pay for and if we can pivot or persevere depending on the situation. So yeah, we are really now, I'm actually so freaking excited to do this. Oh my gosh, I need to be doing something like this, dudes. Like, we've been in school for so long, we can't do crap. Now I really want to do this. I really want to do that. I really want to walk down the streets of, I don't know, whichever city here and start asking people what do they need, if they want to be our early adopters or not. I really want to do that, dude. I love it. I just want to get this thing moving, get my hands dirty, get myself in the freaking game because I can't take it anymore. I just don't want to continue pondering and thinking and blah. I just want to do. I just want to execute. I just want to get in touch with reality. And on that note, I think we can end this episode. Thank you very much for listening. This has been the Business Bubble episode number 9, I believe. And so, yeah, Lean Startup Methodology, guys. Recommended 100%. Read it. Look it up. Maybe if you don't like to read like me, listen to it. So yeah. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing or whatever, if you're listening to the podcast or if you are watching the video. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's basically just my journey, you know. I want to take you guys with me, and I'm happy to do so. So thank you. Take care. God bless you, and bye-bye.